This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Walking down its streets in the 1950s and 60s was an exercise in choreography. They whizzed by. Racks of dresses, coats, shirts, suits, pants. Pedestrians joined in the movement. It was a place of energy, a blur of movement. Today, I walk its streets almost every day. Almost no dress racks, no dance, but behind its facades remains a vibrant fashion clothing industry. Indeed, a world hub. It's a classic New York story. Change, adaptation, growth. It's the Garment District. To talk about the past, present, and future of the Garment District and the state of Moynihan Station and more is Vin Cipolla, president of the Municipal Art Society of New York. Prior to 2009, he was the president and CEO of the National Park Foundation, a presidential appointment. Before that, he was executive vice president and publisher of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. He served as CEO and president of a number of private investment firms. Welcome, Vin.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you, Doug.
Let's start with the Municipal Art Society. Art Society? Go ahead. Talk about how this started, what it did, and sort of trace its development so we get some context here.
Municipal Art Society, and, you know, not necessarily the most contemporary sounding name, but...
Right.
But was founded in 1893 by Evangeline Blashfield. She doesn't get enough credit.
Okay, go for it, Evangeline.
Evangeline on West 57th Street in her studio apartment. Got some of her friends together and really...
This is the social elite?
Yeah, the social artists, you know, architects, designers of the time, believing that New York City should be the most beautiful city in the world. They were really born out of the City Beautiful movement.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to work, you know, they went to work to create fountains and places of beauty and art around the city. They believed that beauty and livability went hand in hand. And so that was the inspiration of the Municipal Art Society. And so we've obviously expanded a great deal since then.
Right. What do you do now? What's your mission? What's your purpose?
Livability.
Meaning?
Why do we want to live here? What makes it great to live in a New York neighborhood? What about those characteristics, those ingredients that make this the most thrilling ecosystem to be a part of, to live, work, and play? And how is that nourished and maintained? Are we losing it? Are we gaining it? So the notion of livability... These are my
questions. Go ahead.
I'm happy to ask them with you. So what we look at MAS is we're the livability people. We're studying, we're really working on those factors, those sets of ingredients, those variables that keep New York vibrant and moving forward.
Okay, what are these variables? I mean, and given the diversity of our neighborhoods in terms of socio-demographics, economics, and everything else, are there any common elements here?
Well, the diversity is some of our neighborhoods. I mean, the diversity from a number of different perspectives, right? I mean, one aspect of diversity is being able to work near where one lives, for example. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things about New York City has been its walkability, has been the integration of its neighborhoods between residential and work. Over time, because of zoning and other things, those things have changed, sometimes for the good, sometimes maybe not so much for the good. So those kinds of factors, what makes a place, what makes a place work, Jane Jacobs, you know, the great observer of city life and what makes her a vibrant street, a vibrant neighborhood. All of this kind of thinking comes into the kinds of things and the kinds of issues that we work on at MAS.
Okay, let's do a bit on Jane Jacobs. There's been a spate of books, and the conversation's never stopped of the conflict between Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses. And I think I read somewhere you talked about a dash of Jane Jacobs and a dose of Robert Moses. Has that sort of paradigmatic pendulum, if you will, where are we with that in terms of development? The last two mayors seem to have tipped toward the the Robert Moses side of things?
I think Jane's winning this.
Okay.
Because Jane's whole premise was practical. It was really based on observation. What are people doing in a place? And then how can decisions be made? What kinds of policies need to be thought about to reinforce what's the activity that's already happening there? And I think, you know, common sense kind of rules at the end of the day. And sometimes these large, super big schemas that you know, seem to enjoy popularity with bureaucracies and on planning boards are not necessarily what the citizens of a community want, necessarily maybe what's already happening energetically, organically in that place today. So I think the observational work that goes into thinking about cities and city building that very much is rooted in the thinking of Jane Jacobs is, I think, very much at the center of the conversation about city building globally.
But at the same time, if you look back historically, the drive for public architecture, private architecture, in the main, doesn't exist the way it once did, it seems to me, and that the drive for the aesthetic as well as the financial seems to be lacking. There's no coherence. We don't do big things, in fact, and that's partly political.
Well, we have had a big parks renaissance in New York.
That's absolutely true.
And those are big public or public-private projects in the case of a lot of parks development these days. And it's quite spectacular, really, when you think of the West Side waterfront, when you think of Brooklyn Bridge Park, when you think of other things that have happened.
Washington Square Park, Union Square Park.
Right, and it fits within a trend that's really national and a global trend. I mean, this connection between the built and natural environments, and urbanists really taking the natural environment very seriously and really kind of trying to work with the integration of those places and why that supports livability, why that supports quality of life, why that supports sustainability and resilience, right? We need the natural environment to support the built environment. And I think here in New York we've been through a remarkable period, really, of focus and attention and investment in the natural spaces, in the park spaces, in the designed park spaces. And that's very encouraging and exciting. But you are right in terms of big, extraordinary infrastructure projects, particularly in urban environments in this country. We've been in a downward slide for a long time.
Reaction to the World Trade Center developments?
You know, I think encouraging that there has been some movement, that One World Trade is beginning to soar up into the sky, that the extraordinary task of the underground infrastructure rebuild and redevelopment has really progressed. I mean, we've all been restless about it, but 10 years is like nothing with respect to these kinds of development cycles for something of this scale. I mean, the scale of it is just, you know, enormous. I mean, it's absolutely enormous. I mean, the big dig took however long it took, you know, 15 or 16 years to do.
And it still leaks.
You know, and it's still, I got to tell you, I mean, you just, I mean, it just doesn't seem to have helped the traffic, I hate to say.
No, and it's ugly. We're going to talk about ugly. In October, mid-October, October 13th and 14th, you had your second annual Municipal Art Society Summit for New York City, out of which this Garment Center report came. Talk about the summit, what its purposes are, what its results are. What's going on?
MAS is citywide advocacy organization concerned about livability and those issues affecting the built environment for all New Yorkers. And so it's incumbent upon us to get everybody together, to do a convening, to do a citywide convening. And so last year we had our first MAS Summit for New York City. We put it right in the Penn district. We took the old Sports Authority space in the Hotel Pennsylvania, and we made it look actually pretty jazzy, I think. And it was an experiment to see what it would be like if we had a kind of fast-moving TED style, bring in the best kind of and most diverse range of participants to really take on a lot of these tough issues.
What comes out of it? I mean, you know, obviously there's study, thought, thinking, tangible results? Too early?
No, not too early at all. The MAS works on a set of issues. You bring in 80, 100 people to comment, work on, debate, explore those issues. It's a big influx of content. of very smart policy thinking, of specific recommendations on issues. It can be obviously developed, cataloged, organized, communicated.
Right.
And so it enriches the work of the Municipal Art Society. It forms bridges and networks for other organizations that are doing similar things. It connects funders to issues, people, and development, which is not only for MAS, but for
policymakers as well.
Absolutely. So here, second year, this year we totally different polar venues. We went to Jazz at Lincoln Center, and nearly 100 participants speaking, 500-600 people attending, hundreds then growing to thousands of people. We live streamed this year, so we had hundreds of people literally watching online, but then that moves to thousands as people start to download video and search various topics.
Focus of the summit?
We took on a range of issues, but there were big themes: resilience and sustainability, infrastructure, not to use buzzwords, but those are important things that need to be considered in the work that we do.
And
so zoning, Moynihan Station and Penn Station, infrastructure issues in New York, public housing.
We'll talk about, we've got a lot to talk about, so talk faster. The Garment Center, you released a report, Fashioning the Future, New York City's Garment Center. Very nice title. As I said in the intro, that world, that physical space is not, you look at it and it's not the same physical space. Talk about sort of the garment district historically a little bit, then move to the present, and then move to the core of your analysis and recommendations.
Historically, we all trace ourselves back to the garment industry and the garment district. I mean, my father was what was referred to as a wool boy.
Ooh.
So before World War II, he was forced out of 7th grade to go into a garment manufacturing facility as a wool boy. Never was able to continue his education past the 7th grade. Garment district worker, bootstrapped his way into some kind of broad middle class definition, depending upon how you define that, with a little help from public housing along the way, right? So we all so many of us trace our families, our history, our immigrant histories to the garment district. Sure. I think there's a misconception or perception that the industry is over, and I love your introduction because nothing is over. It's evolved and changed. It's moved around in the way that it needs to operate. But there are 25,000 garment district related workers still in the garment district. Wow. There are 165,000 fashion related jobs in the city of New York. There are $9 billion in wages in fashion. The garment district has the largest concentration of fashion related activities of any zip code in the United States. It's still pretty much is considered, the garment district. New York City is considered the fashion capital universally, globally, and the garment district is considered the center of that capital. It's true that 99.9% of the manufacturing has moved elsewhere, but there is manufacturing.
Where did it go? And what's there now? What is the new manufacturing?
Well, manufacturing went to China. I mean, it's gone to Southeast Asia primarily. Design has come to New York. Young designers want to come here. Okay. It is very hard to get traction. I mean, creative product, their creativity, the creative energy of New York. This is our hot stuff here in New York. It's very hard to get traction as a young designer in London, Paris, or Milan. The social infrastructures are different. The density is different around the industry itself. It's very family and kind of balkanized. In Milan, it's the important couture houses in Paris that are separate in their own little fiefdoms. London operates in a different way. It's disparate around London. We have concentration. We have density. We have the fashion schools located next to the manufacturers that are still building sample dresses and garments for the young designers that are emerging, and then they can take their stuff to Bergdorf's on foot and show it to a buyer. That kind of ecosystem, doesn't really exist anywhere else. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't change, isn't going to change, that there can't be changes, that there can't be a new view of the garment district, which our report does point out, but there's still a tremendous amount of importance.
Do it. What ought to be done? Looking at the garment district now, and you described some of its characteristics in terms of workers and wages, etc. What do you see? What ought to happen, and what is likely to happen?
Well, very tough.
Before we begin, what are we talking about? What is the garment district? I just realized that lots of folks don't know what we're talking about.
The garment district basically stretches from 35th and 5th Avenue to 41st and 9th Avenue, kind of all in there. There's actually a few different sort of lenses that one can push. The district was established because really those activities many decades ago were kind of splattered all across the middle of Manhattan. And as department stores were coming, big fancy department stores were coming up on 5th Avenue, those department store, presidents, managers didn't want all those garment racks getting in the ways of the ladies that were trying to come into the. So they pushed it. They pushed those manufacturing activities west of 5th Avenue. Essentially, that's the way it's been for 70 or 80 years. Also, with respect to the zoning, which is a very complicated issue of the garment district, about 9 million square feet of space was identified as manufacturing space in the garment district. Today, the industry...
By city planning?
Yeah.
Okay.
And protected through zoning.
Okay.
What probably today, and there are various analyses, we have one in here, but the industry today is using a great deal less than 9 million square feet of manufacturing. So there could be an opportunity to unlock some of the real estate assets that are in the garment district, which are really not ever going to be reused or repurposed for manufacturing, at the same time to incent and reinforce the manufacturing that still exists in the garment district.
Sure. What else? So you've got zoning changes. What else ought to happen in that district? Will happen.
Well, bigger than the district, we need to buy USA, we need to buy New York, we need to buy Made in New York. Why not? When we do this MAS survey on livability,
and we'll talk about that. We'll briefly touch on it.
When we polled New Yorkers as to whether they would buy a product if it had a Made in New York label on it, even if it meant it was more expensive, they would buy it.
Now we have to test it empirically. We have to do a
Well,
pilot
we do have
study.
to test it empirically, and we're not talking about what's the margin or what's the differential on the product price.
Sure.
But I do think that there's an understanding, and I think our collective consciousness as a nation is we're getting the picture here.
Okay.
That we've got to support the sort of the economic foundation, the foundational elements of our economic infrastructure.
So basically, the recommendations revolve around zoning changes, some kind of consolidation of the manufacturing.
Perhaps.
So you have maybe economies of scale.
4 buildings, so that there's incentives. There's things that should be done, perhaps around tax issues and tariffs to provide economic stimulus. There are other models for this, under industry models for this. We incentivize, we subsidize, we stimulate in this country, in this state, in this city. We've got an extraordinarily important industry here its importance to New York as it washes over so many all of our creative industries is such that we need to think about ways not only to protect it, but to enhance it.
So the bottom line, is there in your mind the wherewithal and the will to do this, to make the vision that you lay out in this document a reality?
I absolutely think so. I don't think there's disagreement about the importance of the fashion industry, of the design industry in New York City anywhere. There may be some disagreements about the strategy of exactly how to get there to continue to support this activity and keep New York the center of the fashion and design industry. And MAS's role again is, and it's again our responsibility tied to our mission to come up with solid and very specific recommendations that we think can help the development of those kinds of policies and those kinds of changes in the city, and that's what this report outlines.
Okay, let's move to a little bit downtown, I guess, to Moynihan Station, Penn Station. I remember the old Penn Station. I walked through the new Penn Station. The new Penn Station, it's now, 40 years old, is one of the ugliest public areas I've ever seen in my life.
It's hideous.
It's awful. Now, we need to move Penn Station to the old post office building. Now, what's the status of it? Where are we? It looks like we hear about it, we get a little bit of buzz, there's going to be a resurgence, there's interest, blah, 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 and then we go to phase one and then nothing happens. Where are we with this building?
Okay. Most of the subway stuff is under 33rd Street between 7th and 8th Avenue on the Penn Station side of 8th Avenue. The Amtrak stuff, the Amtrak platforms are running under the Farley Post Office,
right,
now referred to as Moynihan Station in terms of the future schema, west of 8th Avenue. So the Farley is there's a phase one project now underway with Farley after like an eternity to get to phase one.
This is like the Second Avenue something. No, that's not as bad, but go ahead.
Right. That really has three parts to it. One is that the platforms that are running underneath there for Amtrak are
right,
being widened so people can actually, get on and off of trains,
right,
underneath the Farley Post Office. Those arches that are on the 8th Avenue corners of the Farley Post
right,
Office, where there are moats in front, are being redeveloped so that we can go down there to kiosk
right,
in or ticket in to get
right,
on an Amtrak train.
What about, go ahead.
And then ventilation is a huge thing because, first of all, the whole, air quality is, not so good in that area of Manhattan Underground. And so the important work is being done in the ventilation systems to be sure that the subterranean environment is an appropriate environment for humans.
Okay. What about the architecture? And then we'll get to the key question. Is this ever going to happen, or are we hallucinating? So
the new architecture or the old architecture?
Let's talk about the new architecture. What is proposed for the exterior and interiors of the station? What makes it an aesthetically interesting or intriguing place?
A grand train hall. That post office structure, Farley East and West, is truly one of the most magnificent structures in the city of New York.
I've been there, yes.
And it completely lends itself to it. It would seem
and
as though
open,
to
right.
it. Yeah, it completely lends itself. The thinking has been that there would be a, between East and West Farley, there's sort of a gut in
right,
the building, right? And so that the concepts that have been proposed there have been to create this kind of marvelous experience of a train hall. It's got this fantastic scale, some kind of glass or atrium, but the whole process with respect to phases 1, 2, and 3, as you've pointed out, has been very, very slow to come. The overall context, right, is that we have an incredible infrastructure crisis in this country. We don't have a federal urban policy worth anything. We have no
It's malign neglect.
We have no really true. We don't have a national mass transportation policy. Certainly, we have a transportation policy which is all about roads and asphalt, and really not about. We have a political party trying to basically completely a Republican Party trying to kill Amtrak. So we don't seem to be moving in the right direction with respect to the necessary infrastructure investment, which, by the way, from a global competitiveness standpoint, we talk about, oh, China's got this, China's got this. Well, China's building train station, and it's building high-speed rail, and it's doing this stuff to really try to create more efficient corridors for productivity. Those investments are not being made in the United States.
And are not likely to be made for Moynihan Station?
I don't believe that. I think there needs to be continued.
I know you don't believe it.
I really don't. I really, really don't believe it.
Is that heart or head talking?
I think it's head. I think it's head talking, or it is my head talking, because I think that underneath this, within all of this that we're talking about, there's a very, very necessary view or consideration of what makes for a resilient city, what makes for a sustainable city with respect to global economic competitiveness and climate change.
Okay.
And I think when you combine both of those things together from a policy standpoint, you come to infrastructure need, renewal, investment. And I think that both of the trending on both of those things is only going to make it more and more urgent. They are not going away.
Okay. Last sort of item of discussion for today, we could talk for hours, is this MAS survey on livability. This is your second annual survey. What is the purpose of the survey, and what briefly were the major findings and conclusions of the survey?
We want to know how New Yorkers are feeling at the neighborhood level about their communities. And it's only the second year, as you pointed out, so it's hard to get trends, right? Because we're trying to create a baseline of data. But what we saw last year and what we're seeing this year are some, very interesting differences depending upon where you live in the city. If you're white, you make more than $75,000 a year, and you live in Manhattan, you're pretty happy.
Right.
If those aren't the,
If you live in the Bronx and you're black or Hispanic and make less than $75,000, the world ain't so great.
It's not so great.
So we've got, I think one of the things that the survey shows is that there are really two cities, or there are really more than two, but it's almost like the rest of the city in the Bronx.
Certainly the survey does reveal that there's the greatest extreme is between how Manhattan residents feel about their communities versus how Bronx residents feel about their communities and satisfaction with the city. I mean, most Manhattan residents, there's no place else in the world they would rather be.
Snooty.
A very large number of Bronx residents, given the choice, would leave the city. So we have these sort of polarized views that go to a lot of really very basic issues.
Does city policy recognize these differences? I mean, they must. And what policy impacts have they had?
I think there are a lot of people working very hard on these disparities in a lot of different ways. And I think that there is and I think particularly in a time, in a very deep recessionary time, that so many people are hurting. And then also just the change of the city itself and all the ways that we're talking about, and then even the global landscape and how that affects what happens in New York. And so, I think there's a lot of work that's being done. I mean, we're trying to contribute to that work, not through just our work on the Garment District, but our work in zoning and other areas. And what's important and we believe, again, which is part of the responsibility of an organization like ours, is to communicate some of these differences, to remind people that, it's not so good in some of these places, and there are investments that need to be made, there are things that need to be thought about and start to happen, and that the residents of these communities want to participate in that planning and in those decisions.
Thanks. We'll have to do this again. We'll talk some more. My thanks to Vin Cipolla for being on the show. For more information about the Municipal Art Society, go to their website, mas.org. See you next week when we visit the Alice Austin Museum on Staten Island, here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.